They told Everett Blake he could buy anything, except a legacy. He had the skyscrapers, the private jets, the stock portfolios that made headlines. But at 45, what haunted him wasn't a market crash or a lawsuit. It was a single word from his doctor. Sterile. Alone in his glass-walled office high above the Chicago skyline, Everett barely heard the ticking of the grandfather clock behind him. Dr. Keene's voice echoed in his head like a cruel refrain. There would be no children. No one to carry the Blake name forward. No family portraits, no bedtime stories, no little footsteps down the hall. He had begged for a retest, offered to fund an entire research wing at the clinic. But the answer didn't change. Money couldn't fix this. Storming out of the building, he sped through the wet streets of downtown, heart-pounding, tires sliding on the rain-slick asphalt. The crash came fast. Screeching brakes, shattered glass, darkness. When he opened his eyes, he wasn't alone. A woman with steady eyes and strong hands was pulling him from the wreckage. Her name was Danielle Brooks, a local high school teacher on her way home. She didn't know who he was, and she didn't care. She saved him because it was the right thing to do. Everett had no idea that this woman, a total stranger, was about to give him something his wealth never could, a future he never saw coming. At the hospital, Everett couldn't shake the image of her face. Those calm eyes, the tone of her voice when she asked if he was okay, the urgency in her hands as she unbuckled his seatbelt and dragged him away from the smoking wreck. He didn't even know her name at the time. Back home with bruised ribs and a stitched forehead, Everett called his assistant and asked for one thing. Find her. It didn't take long. Her name was Danielle Brooks, 34, a public high school teacher in Inglewood on Chicago's South Side. She taught literature by day, volunteered at shelters in the evenings, and mentored teens on weekends. She saved your life, Mr. Blake, his assistant said. But she's not interested in interviews or rewards. That only made him more curious. When he was well enough to walk without limping, Everett reached out and asked to meet her. For coffee, lunch, anything. Danielle hesitated. She wasn't interested in publicity. But eventually, after a few polite phone calls and one handwritten thank you note, she agreed to meet him at a small cafe near her school. The place wasn't like anything Everett was used to. No white tablecloths or valet parking. Just chipped mugs, homemade pies, and the smell of fresh cinnamon rolls that reminded him of simpler times. Danielle showed up in a navy cardigan and jeans, her hair pulled back, no makeup, just a warm, cautious smile. Thank you for coming, Everett said, standing to greet her. You saved my life and I owe you more than just gratitude. Danielle laughed lightly. You don't owe me anything, Mr. Blake. You were in trouble. I helped. That's all. He noticed the way she brushed off praise. She didn't like attention. But the more she spoke about her students, how many came from broken homes, how she taught them not just Shakespeare but how to fill out college applications, the more captivated he became. She was nothing like the women in his world. No pretense. No performance. Just purpose. He asked to see her again. She politely declined. We come from very different worlds, Mr. Blake. But that's exactly why I want to, he replied. Because your world makes a lot more sense than mine right now. Eventually they met again. At a community fundraiser she organized for local teens. Everett showed up in a tailored suit and felt like a fool next to her in a volunteer t-shirt, pouring lemonade and laughing with kids who looked at her like she was the only hope they had left. It was that night, standing by a folding table full of cookies and plastic cups, that Everett realized something. For the first time in years he didn't feel empty. Danielle's presence had a way of grounding him. She didn't flatter his ego or care about his money. She challenged him, asked him why he worked so much, what he was really chasing. He didn't always have answers, but he found himself wanting to. By the time fall leaves began swirling along the sidewalks, their friendship had quietly deepened. They shared stories, walked through parks, sat on benches watching the city move around them. Everett, the man once obsessed with building towers of glass and steel, was starting to build something else, something real. And he didn't even realize how much his world was about to change. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of their meetings settled into something quiet but steady. A walk through Washington Park. A cup of coffee at the neighborhood bakery where Danielle liked the peach muffins. A Saturday visit to a book fair where Everett, more accustomed to corporate summits than street vendors, found himself haggling over a second-hand copy of To Kill a Mockingbird just to impress her. But everything changed one chilly November evening. They were seated on a park bench, wrapped in scarves, watching the sun dip below the lakefront when Danielle suddenly grew quiet. She took a long breath and turned to him. "There's something I need to tell you," she said softly, folding her hands in her lap. Everett looked at her, sensing the seriousness in her tone. "I'm pregnant," she said. "With twins." For a moment, the wind was the only thing either of them heard. Everett blinked, trying to process. "Pregnant? Twins? I found out a few weeks ago," she continued, voice steadier now. "I wasn't sure how to tell you. I've been trying to do this on my own." Instead of panic or retreat, Everett's reaction surprised even himself. "Twins," he repeated, a gentle smile tugging at his lips. "That's a lot of socks." Danielle blinked in surprise, then laughed. A laugh that broke through the tension in the air like sunlight through clouds. "I don't expect anything from you," she said quickly. "I don't want to be someone's charity case or project. I've always handled things on my own." Everett leaned forward, his voice low and sincere. "You're not a project, Danielle. You're the most grounded, courageous person I've ever met. I'm not here out of obligation. I'm here because I want to be." She studied him for a long moment, searching his face for any sign of doubt or pity. But there was only clarity in his eyes. And something else she hadn't expected, peace. That night, as they walked back through the city, Everett offered her his arm. She took it. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was wandering through life alone. From then on, he made a point to show up, not in grand gestures but in ways that mattered. He brought her a set of maternity pillows after reading online that backaches were worse with twins. He dropped off prenatal vitamins wrapped with a bow, pretending it was no big deal. He even signed them both up for a twin parenting class at a local community center, though he conveniently forgot to mention it until the day before. Danielle rolled her eyes, but she smiled each time. The closer they grew, the more Everett began to open up. About the pain of his diagnosis. About the future he thought he'd lost. About the nights he used to lie awake wondering if he'd ever have more than stock portfolios to leave behind. And with Danielle he felt it, not just the possibility of a future but of a family. The twins weren't even born yet, and still he found himself watching the world differently. Softer. Slower. With hope. And somewhere deep in his heart, Everett Blake, the man who thought legacy came from power, was beginning to realize it might actually come from love. As winter crept into Chicago, Everett found himself rearranging his life in ways he never thought possible. He was still the CEO of Blake & Associates, still fielding high-stakes meetings and managing multi-million-dollar mergers. But something had shifted. His mornings now started with check-ins on Danielle. His afternoons included detours to parenting stores for bottle warmers and onesies. And his evenings often ended beside her on a worn couch in her modest apartment, the TV playing softly in the background while she rested her head on his shoulder. He didn't announce it to the world. He didn't need to. The people who mattered, Danielle and the two little lives growing inside her, already knew. But their quiet rhythm was interrupted one day when a call came from Danielle during Everett's board meeting. She never called during work hours. His chest tightened as he saw her name flash on the screen. He excused himself quickly and answered. It wasn't her voice, it was a nurse. "Mr. Blake, this is Mercy General Hospital. Miss Brooks has been admitted. She's gone into premature labor." Everett's world narrowed to a pinhole. "She's not due for another 2 months," he whispered, panic rising in his throat. "We're doing everything we can," the nurse said gently. Without hesitation, Everett left everything behind. His board members, his assistants' questions, his coat. He didn't even feel the cold as he raced to the hospital, heart pounding harder with each red light he ran. By the time he arrived, Danielle was already in the delivery room. He caught a glimpse of her face, tense with pain, eyes wide with fear, before a nurse guided him back to the hallway. "I need to be with her," he pleaded. "We'll bring you in when it's safe," she replied, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I promise." The waiting room was nearly empty. Just the hum of vending machines and the rhythmic squeak of nurses' shoes down linoleum halls. Everett paced relentlessly, staring at the second hand on the clock, praying with each tick that both babies would survive. Memories of his own mother, who had died during childbirth when he was only 3, surged into his mind. He clenched his fists. Not again. Not this time. Finally, after what felt like days compressed into hours, a nurse appeared. "They're here," she said softly. "2 baby girls." Everett's knees nearly buckled. She led him to the NICU, where 2 tiny incubators stood beneath soft blue lights. Each held a swaddled miracle, one smaller with tiny fingers twitching in sleep. The other, slightly bigger, wiggled her feet restlessly beneath the blanket. "This is Leah," the nurse said, pointing to the smaller one. "And this is Rose." Everett stood motionless, tears clouding his vision. The glass between them seemed to disappear as he whispered, "Hi girls. Daddy's here." The names Danielle had chosen, Leah and Rose, weren't from his world of mergers and market shares. They were names of grace and strength. And as Everett placed his palm gently against the glass, something deep and eternal settled into his bones. He wasn't a billionaire at that moment. He wasn't a CEO. He was a father. And in that quiet NICU room, filled with machines and beeping monitors, Everett Blake knew with absolute certainty. His life had just begun. The days that followed were unlike anything Everett had ever experienced. He traded boardrooms for hospital corridors, power lunches for late-night diaper changes, and corporate forecasts for oxygen levels and heart monitors. Every morning he sat beside Leah and Rose's incubators, whispering to them softly, reading from worn copies of Charlotte's Web and The Little Prince, books Danielle remembered fondly from her childhood. Though they were barely the size of his forearm, each daughter gripped his heart with a force stronger than any contract he'd ever signed. Danielle, still recovering from her emergency C-section, joined him whenever she could. The labor had taken a toll on her body, but not on her spirit. She'd walk slowly into the NICU, wearing hospital slippers and a pale green robe, and Everett would immediately rise to guide her to a chair beside the girls. They sat for hours without speaking, just watching the rise and fall of tiny chests, the flickering of delicate eyelids, the beeping monitors like lullabies in the background. These weren't the moments Everett was used to, but they were the ones that mattered most. One evening, after Danielle had fallen asleep in her hospital room, Everett remained by the incubators. He pulled a chair closer to Leah's side and began to talk, not in baby talk but in honesty. "Leah, sweetheart," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I used to think success meant leaving behind buildings, companies, something people could point to and say, that was his." He paused, glancing over to Rose. "But now, I think success looks a lot like this. Like your little fingers twitching in your sleep. Like your mom's hand in mine. Like being here, really here." The nurses started to notice. The powerful Everett Blake, who once lived by precision and protocol, now carried a diaper bag. He learned to warm bottles just right, could identify a good swaddle, and somehow remembered every feeding schedule. When the staff suggested he go home for rest, he simply smiled and said, "Home is here right now." His assistant back at the firm was stunned. "Mr. Blake has taken an indefinite leave," she told board members. "I don't know when he'll be back." The truth was, Everett didn't know either. He didn't care. For once in his life, everything that truly mattered was within reach, wrapped in blankets, fighting for strength with every breath. And the bond? It didn't come from blood. It came from presence, from showing up, from choosing them over and over. He had never known what fatherhood would feel like. He thought it might be ceremonial or symbolic, maybe even transactional, as everything in his world often was. But this was transformational. Each day, as Leah's heartbeat grew steadier and Rose's tiny lungs expanded with more confidence, Everett felt something expand within him too. Something deeper than legacy. Love. Unconditional, unwavering love. One afternoon, as the winter sun filtered softly through the NICU windows, Everett leaned in close and whispered to both girls, "You may not carry my name by blood, but you carry everything that matters." And that, he realized, was the beginning of a new kind of legacy, one not written in ink or steel, but in breath, warmth, and heartbeats. As winter gave way to the early winds of spring, Everett Blake was no longer the man who once saw fatherhood as a distant, abstract idea. In the sterile light of the NICU, amidst blinking monitors and hushed conversations, he had discovered something far more profound than anything his billion-dollar empire had ever given him: belonging. The news of Everett's daily presence at the hospital eventually found its way to the public. A photo, snapped discreetly by a nurse and later shared online, showed the powerful CEO sitting cross-legged on the NICU floor, holding a bottle in one hand and reading Goodnight Moon to two fragile newborns, their incubators beside him. It went viral within hours. The media scrambled to piece together the story. Rumors swirled. Was Everett Blake the biological father? Was this a publicity stunt? Was he stepping away from business? But Everett stayed silent. Not because he was hiding anything, but because he no longer owed the world explanations. He only owed Leah and Rose his presence. Danielle watched all of this unfold with quiet awe. She'd always known Everett had a good heart, but watching him with the girls, patient, gentle, present, was something else entirely. He didn't just show up, he stayed. One afternoon, as she wheeled herself into the NICU still sore from surgery, Everett greeted her with a soft kiss to her forehead and guided her chair next to Rose's incubator. "They're gaining weight," he said, voice brimming with pride. "Leah's almost 4 pounds now." Danielle smiled, brushing back a tear. "They're fighters. They get it from their mother." As days passed, Everett took to journaling his thoughts, scratched out lines in a worn leather notebook. He wrote about hope, about fear, about learning how to swaddle a baby with one hand and cradle another with the other. He even wrote about love, though he hadn't used that word in years, not in the real sense. Then came the moment that changed everything again. Late one night, Danielle stirred from her hospital bed to find Everett pacing quietly in the hallway, cradling Rose in his arms. The nurses had finally let her out of the incubator for skin-to-skin contact, and Everett had volunteered to hold her when Danielle had dozed off. Danielle watched from the doorway as Everett swayed gently, whispering a lullaby that was off-key but tender. Later, as he laid Rose back in the incubator and turned, surprised to see Danielle awake, she asked, "Why do you do all this, Everett? Why stay? Why care this much?" He took a breath, stepped toward her, and said without hesitation, "Because this isn't something I'm stepping into. It's something I've already become. I'm not here to play a role," he continued. "I'm here because I love them. And I love you." The words hung in the quiet, softened only by the hum of machines and the rhythm of tiny breaths. Danielle didn't answer right away. She didn't need to. Her tears did. So did the way she reached for his hand and held it tightly. For Everett Blake, this moment, this unassuming night in a hospital hallway, meant more than any corporate acquisition, more than any front-page profile. Because in this small, dim corner of the world, he had finally found the only title he'd ever truly wanted: Dad. As Leah and Rose slowly gained strength, the hospital room that once felt like a battlefield began to feel like a home. The nurses smiled more. The alarms chimed less. Danielle began walking without assistance, and Everett rarely left their side. The three of them, soon to be four, once the girls were discharged, had built a cocoon of peace inside those hospital walls. But peace rarely lasts when the world finds out you're rewriting the rules. Word of Everett's devotion had reached the higher floors of his social circle, particularly to his sister Meredith, a sharp-tongued socialite who had long overseen the public image of the Blake name. Meredith had always kept Everett's personal affairs tidy, or at the very least, well hidden. But this relationship with a woman outside their social class, outside their race, and with twins no one could explain, was, in her words, a PR disaster waiting to happen. She didn't confront Everett directly. Instead, she went to Danielle. Danielle was sitting alone in the hospital cafe one afternoon, sipping peppermint tea when Meredith arrived, tailored trench coat, polished shoes, and the unmistakable air of someone who had never been told no. "I imagine you're overwhelmed," Meredith began, sliding into the seat across from her uninvited. "All of this attention. Change." Danielle looked up slowly, her body tense. "And you are Meredith Blake, Everett's sister, and caretaker of our family's reputation, you might say." Danielle set her cup down carefully. "I see," Meredith continued, tone smooth as glass. "You seem like a decent person, which is why I'm here to offer you something. A way out. Quietly. Respectfully. With support." She slid an envelope across the table. Danielle didn't open it. She didn't have to. "I'm not for sale," she said, voice steady. "No one said you were," Meredith replied coolly. But legacies, real ones, require clean lines, clear stories. And you, Miss Brooks, don't exactly fit the narrative. Danielle stood. Funny. I thought love made the story worth telling. She walked away without another word, leaving the envelope untouched on the table. That evening, Danielle told Everett everything. He didn't yell. He didn't curse. He just listened. Then he walked into his office, pulled out his phone, and dialed his sister's number. You don't speak to her again, he said simply. Not in private. Not in public. Not ever. Meredith tried to interrupt, but Everett didn't give her the chance. I've spent my whole life protecting the Blake name. But from now on I'm protecting something else, something that actually matters. He hung up. Returning to Danielle, Everett took both of her hands and held them tightly. I don't care what the world thinks, he said. I care what we build. This family, these girls, you're not just part of my life, Danielle. You are my life. Danielle's eyes welled, not out of fear this time, but out of certainty. They both knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time they wouldn't be walking it alone. It happened on a crisp autumn morning, just days before Leah and Rose were scheduled to leave the NICU. Everett was in the middle of a routine board meeting, distractedly nodding through quarterly projections, when his phone buzzed on the table. He would have ignored it until he saw the caller ID. Danielle. Except it wasn't her voice on the line. It was a nurse. Mr. Blake, this is St. Catherine's. Ms. Brooks has just been admitted. She's gone into labor. Everett's heart dropped. She's not due for another 2 months, he whispered. I know, the nurse replied. But we're doing everything we can. You should come immediately. He didn't say goodbye. Didn't explain. He stood from the boardroom table and simply walked out. Phones rang, voices called after him, but Everett didn't stop. He moved like a man possessed, grabbing his coat, keys and heading straight for the car. The drive was a blur, stoplights, sirens, rain against the windshield, all fading beneath the pounding of his own heartbeat. Memories hit him like punches. His mother's death in childbirth, the hollow ache that had followed, the years of believing he was never meant for family. And now the woman he loved was in danger. So were the girls he hadn't even held yet. When he arrived at the hospital, the maternity ward was a flurry of activity. A nurse recognized him instantly and led him toward Danielle's room. He heard her cries before he saw her. Then he stepped in, and everything else disappeared. Danielle was lying on the bed, sweat beading on her forehead, her breathing rapid and shallow. But when she saw him, something shifted. Her eyes locked on his, and for a moment, the fear gave way to relief. You're here, she whispered, her voice cracking. I'm here, Everett said, rushing to her side, taking her hand in both of his. And I'm not going anywhere. Doctors moved quickly, calling out instructions. Nurses prepped for an emergency C-section. The monitors beeped faster, the tension thickening with every second. Please, Everett pleaded. Let me stay with her. One nurse gently shook her head. We need to focus, Mr. Blake. We'll bring you in once it's safe. He kissed Danielle's hand, felt it tremble beneath his lips and whispered, You're stronger than anyone I've ever known. I'll be waiting. Then he was ushered out. The waiting room was empty save for a wall clock that ticked too slowly and a vending machine humming in the corner. Everett paced like a caged animal, fists clenched, jaw tight. Every passing second stretched into a lifetime. He had survived business collapses, hostile takeovers and international crises, but nothing had ever made him feel so helpless. At last a nurse returned. They're here, she said gently. You have 2 daughters. Everett didn't speak. He simply nodded, following her down the hallway, every step heavier than the last. They entered the neonatal intensive care unit, quiet, sterile, glowing with the soft hum of machines. 2 incubators waited in the center of the room. Inside them, 2 impossibly small bundles of life, wrapped in pink blankets, hooked up to tubes and monitors. This is Leah, the nurse whispered, leading him to the smaller one. Everett looked down, eyes flooding. Her tiny chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, fingers no bigger than grains of rice. And this is Rose. She was just a touch bigger, her eyes flickering behind shut lids. Everett placed a hand gently against the glass. Hi girls, he choked. Daddy's here. And in that moment, surrounded by wires, beeping monitors, and two fragile hearts fighting to live, Everett knew nothing else in the world mattered. In the days that followed, Everett rarely left the NICU. He memorized the rhythm of every monitor, knew which nurse preferred soft jazz in the evenings, and learned to recognize the tiniest changes in Leah and Rose's breathing. One evening, after Danielle had returned to her hospital room to rest, Everett sat quietly between the girls' incubators. The machines beeped in a calm, steady tempo. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the small journal he'd been carrying since the accident. Flipping to a fresh page, he began to write. Leah, Rose, before you came, I thought legacy meant buildings and money. But now I see legacy as love. It's what you leave in people, not what you leave to them. He looked up, tears pricking his eyes as Leah stirred and Rose stretched her tiny fingers. I may not have given you life, he whispered. But you've given mine new meaning. Life lesson. Sometimes the family that defines us isn't the one we plan, but the one we choose. True love isn't measured in DNA, titles, or bank accounts. It's measured in the quiet moments, when we show up, stay present, and love without limits. Has someone ever entered your life and changed everything you thought you knew about love and family? Share your story in the comments. We read every one. And if this story touched your heart, subscribe for more real, powerful tales of connection, resilience, and second chances. Because sometimes, the family we build is the greatest legacy of all.